And she also has a business called Awake at Work, and she will introduce and interview. Thank you. Welcome.
You're on there.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, great. So, welcome, everyone, and I'm very honored to introduce Jeff Klein tonight. I'd like to give you a bit of his background, and then we'll begin the questioning. So, Jeff has been dedicated for over 30 years to the path.
I was 12 when it started.
Yes, I could. To the path of integrating service with business, and in his own words, to become ever more human and fully present in the context of my work for the greatest good and to support others in doing the same. So Jeff wears many hats and facilitates many initiatives. He's the CEO of Working for Good. He's a trustee and member of the executive team of Conscious Capitalism, Inc., where he also facilitates an annual CEO summit. And there's also, you shall know, an important event, Conscious Capitalism 2013, on April 5th,
And 6th, yeah.
and 6th,
We'll talk
from
about
8:30 to 5:30 in San Francisco, the Masonic Auditorium. So put that on your calendars. He's also executive producer of beinghuman.org, which is an initiative to bring multiple disciplines together across the natural sciences and the social sciences to engage a new understanding of what it means to be human. They had a successful event in 2012. Was that the launch of that in 2012?
Yeah.
And the next event is going to be September 28th in San Francisco. So put that on your calendar too. He's host of a weekly radio program called It's Just Good Business. He's a consultant to many organizations such as the Institute of Noetic Sciences, the National Geographic Society, the Esalen Institute, and others. And he's also,
Past tense, then now.
yes, past tense, right? And as an author, his books include Working for Good, which was published in 2009 and also received a Business Book Award. And his new book, just published last year, is It's Just Good Business, The Emergence of Conscious Capitalism and the Practice of Working for Good.
Designed to be read in less than half an hour. Because that's all anybody will even think about giving to a book, right?
Yeah, and with wonderful business stories in it.
Yeah.
Yes, a lot of wonderful examples. On his website, he also says, in addition to being an actively engaged, full-time single father of a teenage daughter, I love surfing, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, chi running, and moving in general. So maybe we can do this interview moving around.
I was going to say, I
like
do
that.
not sit
Yes.
typically.
Well,
This
we
is
might-
really hard. This is the hardest part of the night, is
Yes.
this.
Okay, well, we can do that. We can move about. Anyway, let's please give a warm welcome to Jeff Klein.
Thank you.
So I'd like to begin by asking you a question that relates to a very important quote from Khalil Gibran that you used to introduce both of your books. And the quote is, "Work is love made visible." So please tell us what that quote means to you.
Well, it means a lot of things, but at the foundation is I found, and I can only really speak for myself, that work is one of the most enlivening things I can imagine. It's an opportunity for me to engage with life, right? Engage with ideas, engage with the material world, engage with other people, and can envision and manifest, right? And for me, that's love, right? Love is when you've got a passion inside of you and a sense of purpose, and then you move with it. Again, moving, right? You move into it and with it and connect with others and move together. That to me, that's love. That's what work is for me. And I find that when other people connect with work that way, it's the same for them, right? When they're connected to a sense of purpose and passion in other people, they come alive, right? They come alive, they glow, as it were, and they learn, they grow, they develop, and all of that for me, call it love, whatever you want to call it, it's alive, and when you're alive, you're living love, right? So, yeah.
You also say in your book, Working for Good.
I better read that book.
Yeah, you're going to be grilled on that.
Yeah.
Yeah. that you've always loved working.
Yeah.
Could you give us some examples of that love of work in your younger days, and when and how did your love of working begin?
So I have to say that I opened the introduction to my book. I was, Meryl Faye, my daughter, was 8 at the time, and she was sitting in the backseat of the car one day, and she said to one of her friends, "You're not going to believe this, but my dad actually loves to work." And that's how I started my book, because it's true. Well, you know, I'm hesitating for a second. You remember Carl Sagan? Carl Sagan was once asked, "How do you bake an apple pie from scratch?" And his response was, "Well, if you really want to bake an apple pie from scratch, you have to go back to the Big Bang," right? So whenever you're asked the question of when something started, who knows, right? How far back do you go? And to some extent, I'd say my relationship to work, I think, to be fully honest with this, and no one's asked me this question before, it's a very good question, started because my mom, if I'm in constant motion, my mom is like, in the tape recorder, you can fast forward and just watch this. That's my mom. She's like, going. And she's always doing a project. We lived on a farm, so it's like, we need a fence over here, we need a pasture, I want a new garden bed. And I was the oldest son, and so I was like, it always came to me, right? And I either got my younger brothers or my sister to do it, or I did it myself. And so I guess in some respects, maybe it was a coping strategy. If I'm gonna do all this stuff, I might as well enjoy it, right? So I think it probably in part was just the recognition that, well, this is what life is about, and it's much better to enjoy life than to suffer it. So just enjoy what you're doing. And I mean, that's one story. I'm sure I could come up with 5 different stories.
And just curious, what were some of your favorite things to do on the farm?
Well, we didn't always live on the farm, mind you. Well, as I indicated, I like to move, and I'm very physical. I learn, through my body. So anything that, produced sweat was good for me. Whether it's throwing bales of hay or digging fence posts or anything, really. Yeah.
Thank you. So,
I'll add this. I like doing dishes, and one of the reasons I like doing dishes, our family was kind of crazy and a lot of activity, and in general. But think holidays, you have Thanksgiving and there's 20 people, and you go and you do dishes, right? And you've got peace. Nobody else wants to be there doing dishes. Warm water, motion. It helps. It's like, oh, so I always would find a way to engage with work that just like, oh, this is, what's the benefit in this? And there's always something.
Almost relaxing.
Totally. And digesting and all of it. Sure, it's like Brer Rabbit, right? Don't throw me in the briar patch, right? No, don't make me do the dishes, right? Yeah. Happily. Did that answer your question?
Yes, you did. Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
So you mentioned your mother, and I wanted to ask a bit more about your family influences, because in the acknowledgments at the end of your book, in Working for Good, you honor your parents as setting you on the path of working for good, like you just mentioned about your mother. And you also honor your grandmother as helping you reconcile your relationship to money.
This is true.
Very powerful statement. So would you please share with us some other examples of how family members influenced your path forward?
Yeah, so my dad was a small businessman, and well, he's 6'2", so he's not that small, but I mean, business was small. And he taught me a number of things. I mean, one is you just treat people well. I mean, that is one thing I learned from him. You're in business, he would treat the assistants or secretaries of his clients, as though they were princes and princesses, right? I mean, you just treat people well. And the guy that runs or owns the company is no more important than anyone in there. And he didn't say, he both said it, but he lived it. And I saw it all the time. I worked with him, off and on during the years. My mom was very much in service. She did something called Green Circle, which was a human rights thing in, I was in 5th grade or something. We picked up stray animals and stray kids, right? There was always someone else, living in our house that needed a place to, recover. So taking care of people, treating people well, whether it's in the context of, work or business or just in life, was something that was modeled for me pretty much.
Instilled.
And it was, and that's just what you do.
That's wonderful.
So that, formed the foundation. And then to my grandmother, let me think. I'm trying to think if what it would take to tell that story. Well, let's just say there was a point at which I was in call it a crisis, a transition, and I'd never really gone. I must have been maybe 40, early 40s or something, and I just called her up and I asked her, some questions. My grandfather was a stockbroker and investor, and did very well, and so she had been with money, and I just asked her some questions, and she just gave me just the most beautiful reflections and answers that helped me put things in perspective. That to this day, continue to feed me. So, and that I guess you could say that pattern of looking to elders for wisdom is something that I still do. I tend to work with and find mentors and teachers. I have I didn't go to business school. I took 2 business classes, and everything else I've learned by doing it, and also finding mentors, people who've, with a lot of experience and just, doing it and then doing it with them, right? Doing it with them. That's been my principal path of learning. So do it, fall 1,000 times until you figure it out, and find somebody who's done it, who knows how to do it, and do it with them.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. If I may ask, if you're comfortable sharing,
Sure.
would you mind sharing with us what one of those pearls of wisdom is that your grandmother shared?
Well, it's actually insight into family dynamics more than anything else. So it's not necessarily transferable. So in other words, give me insights into and kind of validation of some of my sense of our family dynamics that thus gave me kind of reinforced, grounded me in my, I wasn't crazy, it's kind of, so it's not really transferable.
How about your relationship with money?
Relationship with money and the family, yeah. Exactly.
Great, thank you.
So,
Thank you.
yeah, I would share if it was helpful, but I don't think it's helpful.
Sure, that's
Yeah.
fine, thank you.
Sure.
So in terms of your own personal growth in your life, what was a major turning point for you?
Which one? No. Okay, I'll tell you a moment. One really, and maybe 2, but one is my dad is to this day is into sports, like totally. And I grew up playing sports, watching sports, going to sporting events. It was a huge part of my life. Energy, attention, and all that. And I my first year in college, went through almost the whole freshman year, every weekend, with the guys, watching sport. And then one day, it was, spring afternoon, and I was watching a game. I don't remember what sport it was even, with, 10 guys. And I looked around and I went, what the hell am I doing? Right? I've been doing this my whole life. I'm not here to do this. I'm here to discover what else is out there. I walked out of the room and I never turned back. And I literally cold turkey after, 18 years or whatever, 19 years of being a complete sportaholic, I completely went cold turkey in that moment. And it started a journey that took me, 1,000 doors. My dad, for years, even decades, what happened? What happened to you? And now I can sit down and watch a sporting event, and I followed the Giants a little bit, and not, But when you first, break an addiction, you got to just totally stay away from it because it. So it was an epiphany. It was an insight that we can always. There is more than whatever it is that we're. And I've done that now. I can't even count the number of times where I've just enough of that. On to the next thing. Because now I have the experience of when you do that, when you kind of take the lens up. Oh my God, there's just it's endless what you can explore and discover. Right? Yeah. Yeah.
What has contributed to your excitement about business itself?
Ooh, one is business is generative, right? And that's exciting. I mean, I get kicks. I get like excited when I plant grass seed and see it pop up, you know. Anything that's generative, you know, their life. And business is one of the most generative, forums on the planet. And business at its core, right, is about human beings, right? It's about, and it's never just an individual. It's always more than one. But, you know, there might be one person that has an idea or a vision. They have to engage someone else, or it might be a couple people that, you know, co-generate a vision, an idea. And so there's that ideation, and then there's the manifestation, and the whole process. And then there's the ongoing, right, developmental process. It's just extraordinary. So it's like, you know, I'm a dad, I mentioned, and, you know, you go through the developmental phases of a kid, and every moment of development is exciting. Same thing with the business, except I guess you say it's more complex because it's a bunch of human beings. I can say a lot more about that, but it sounds like, okay.
Yeah, we'll be exploring these things.
Yeah.
Could you please share a time with us when perhaps you even had a business challenge or maybe even a business failure?
Mm-hmm.
What was that about? What did you learn, and how did it help you grow as an entrepreneur?
Oh, boy. Let me count the ways, right? You know, and Michael Jordan, they're great quotes. I don't remember them offhand, but Michael Jordan and Wayne Gretzky, right, both talk about how if they hadn't missed, you know, 3,000 shots, you know, they would have never made you know. I mean, you just gotta, you know. One piece of wisdom that I see and feel and hear from just countless people of great skill and accomplishment is, you know, it's like Thomas Edison. You know, the 10,000 experiments that didn't create the light bulb, they weren't failures. I learned how not to create a light bulb so that eventually I could create one, right? So, and that's kind of answering the failure question. Actually, ask the last part of that question again, because
And it said, what did you learn from the failure that helped you grow as an entrepreneur? And could you actually tell us about a specific
specific failure.
Yeah, people like hearing stories.
Yeah.
Tell us a story.
Well, and I'll tell again, because what's a failure? But
Sure.
So I'm just seeing this panoply of events. I'll tell two quick ones. So one was in the context of a company called Seeds of Change. Familiar with Seeds of Change, organic seed company, which still exists. So in some respects, nothing is a failure, right? I was serving as general manager for Seeds of Change. I had come in. The people that were running it and built it were friends of mine, and I came in. I was in a transition, and they needed help, so I went to Santa Fe and kind of came in and cleaned up one kind of department after another. And after about 5 months, the principal owners of the company, who were the Mars family, right, M&Ms and all that. I don't know if I should be telling this story, but what the heck. They came to me, another guy, and they said, you know, we really like what you're doing, and we're really unhappy with the way this company's being run. And that was the beginning of what was an internal takeover that the Mars, you know, family ended up taking over. And so there were a bunch, and I then stayed on and kind of ran facilitated transition of legal structure and financial structure and changed the seed packages and the catalog, you know, kind of took the company to the next level, and ended up leaving because one of the guys that they had put on the board, the Mars family put on the board, was the retired president of M&Ms, right? And they were very much like a military company, you know. And I'll just tell the whole story here. So, so a couple. Well, there's various insights. So and a little background. The first day I got there, right, and the people that I won't name names, the people that were running it were really good people, and they had. There's so many lessons in this one. They were passionate about diversity in our food system, right? That was their focus, and, you know, creating business as a force for change. So I got down there, and there was a guy sitting in a room maybe twice the size of this table. The copy machine was right next to his desk. The office supplies were behind him. And he was the guy who was taking all of the orders, right, from the customers and the retailers. And I was like, wait a second, you got to be kidding me. This is how you're treating a human being? So I located a closet in the hall, and I took a crowbar and I ripped out the closet. I wired up a jack. I moved the copy machine in the hall and the supply shelf in the hall. And I said, this is an office for a human being. This is a place for copying, and it was. It was one thing like that after another, right? Just the people across town at the warehouse, there were 30-some people who were packing the seeds, taking care of the seeds and all that. Nobody from the headquarters had been over there I had to clean up other stuff first. When I got over there a month after I got there, nobody had there was one guy who was kind of like, I don't know what he was even doing there, who would like call him up every once in a while. Hi, how you doing? And that was it. They were lost. They had no connection, no grounding, no direction. So I went over there, and the two women who were kind of running the place had a list of about 30 questions. Are you all right if I just keep telling the story?
Sure.
All right. You okay?
Oh, yeah.
So, and there's a moral to the story too here. So they had about 30 questions. Like, what can we do? What do we do about this, right? And so I said, well, what do you think, right? Needless to say, they had a really good answer, right? Because they thought about it, whoever was doing the work. And they went through the 30 questions, and for 28 of them, I said, what do you think? They said this. I said, sounds good to me. For the other two, I asked a couple questions. We went back and forth, and together we came up with a different solution. Went great. Week later, came back. It was 20 questions. A week later, it was 10. A week later, it was 2, and the place was humming. And they totally transformed the entire. They changed the physical setup. They changed the pop. Everything. They knew what to do. They just needed, somebody saying, go for it, guys. So anyway, I'll fast forward. The lessons I learned for that, and which may still be relevant in this context of green sustainable business. This is, 1993, 94 that I'm talking about. But a couple of the insights that I got, and I actually referred to it in Working for Good, is there's this tendency for a, big vision in service to humanity to trump taking care of real people, real time, right now. And it's hogwash. It's just totally not okay. And if you, overworking, unhealthy, not taking care of yourself, not taking care of each other, not treating each other well because we're on a mission to save the world. It's like, I don't want the world that you're going to create if that's how you're going to save it. It's just not okay. So that's really, and it's not a failure, but I left. It didn't succeed in fully manifesting what I might have brought there, but those were really powerful insights that I got. And in part, I wrote Working for Good after another project that ended up shutting down and not manifesting. So that was a crisis, a failed business that I was part of, and I was back in Pennsylvania, getting ready to have a baby and all this, and I just said, what the hell am I doing, right? And what have I been doing actually, that's not true. I wrote an earlier version of it back then in 95. And then after writing it, I realized I'm not ready to publish a book. I need to do more. And I guess it was 12 years later that I actually wrote the book. So, all right, that's enough of that story probably, right? Get some. Was there something in there? Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Absolutely, yes. People love to hear stories.
Okay. I can tell stories.
It colors and everything. Yeah, thank you. So a different kind of question.
Yeah.
A lot of people equate work with a job.
Mm-hmm.
How do you see the two? Are they similar?
Man, it's really hard for me because I have always had the orientation I have. So I only have my experience. I observe other people. I've talked to other people, obviously. But my experience is if it isn't a calling, if it isn't alive, it isn't aligned with my passion, if it isn't feeding me, I'd rather be unemployed on the street and hope something else will happen. So it's hard for me to, but
You've never had what you call a job?
No.
Or you didn't last in it long?
No, I can't do that.
So how would you?
I've had jobs, but not, well, and so there's the job, there's the there's the career, and there's the calling, right? There's three levels that are often referred to. And the job is the thing, you just do it because you need to get paid, you need to make a living. The career is something that you identify with, it feeds you in some way, there's growth and development in it. But at the end of the day, it's not the same. And then a calling is something where it's just you're alive, you're a light, you're living in passion in the sense and purpose, every day, right? And I guess I had this sense, this calling sense, before I even knew what the heck what it meant. Did any of you ever hear the Bill Cosby routine, Noah's Ark? Yeah. So real quick, so Noah's in his workshop, right? And all of a sudden he hears a voice, Noah, what's that? It's like, Noah, this is the Lord, right? Who is this? Anyway, he tells him to build this ark, and he goes, what's an ark? So the point is, I had this sense of, okay, your job is to, leverage the power of business for the greater good. Okay, what does that mean? And it took me, kind of decades to figure out what it meant. But here I am, 30-some years later, 2 books kind of around the conscious capital. So, you stay with it, and it ultimately makes sense, So that was kind of a answer plus, maybe. Okay, all right, you're welcome. You're good at this. I really appreciate the thought you put into this, because not only did you have to, you can't come up with questions like that unless you understand, who you're questioning. It's really good.
You've been at something for 30 years, so I figured I'd better give it some time.
Well, thank you. And you've obviously been at it for comparable.
Thank you. So let's talk about conscious capitalism.
Yes.
Okay?
Happy to.
And so you explain in your work, say that conscious capitalism is a paradigm shift, and that conscious capitalists and conscious businesses embrace their responsibility to society. But conscious capitalism is much more than corporate social responsibility.
This is true.
Which tends to be an add-on to the old business paradigm, which focuses primarily on profit. So would you please explain more about how you see these 2 different paradigms?
Yeah.
And then would you also please explain 2 to 3 examples of how you see these changes happening with CEOs you work with?
Okay. So first I'll define conscious capitalism. And this definition is the one that we are putting forward at Conscious Capitalism, Inc., which is a nonprofit that is advancing and address the idea of conscious capitalism. First, we refer to conscious capitalism as an idea or a philosophy, an approach to business, an emerging paradigm, a movement, a community, and an organization. It's all of those things. Depends on what context you're speaking about it. It's one or more of those. In the context of a business and in a practical sense, what we mean by conscious capitalism is a business that focuses on 4 principles. And again, next year it'll probably be 5, because it was 2, and then a couple of years later it was 3. Last year we added another one. So it's an emergent, evolving understanding, right? So the 4 are, and I'll say them real quick and then I'll go back: higher purpose, right? A stakeholder orientation, conscious leadership, and conscious culture. I'll go into them briefly. So in the prevailing paradigm, the prevailing perspective on what is business, both from within the business community and some big significant sector of the business community, and and society projecting onto business that the business of business is business, right? Business is about making money. Business is about returning a financial return to shareholders, right? That's the prevailing paradigm. Conscious capitalism and conscious capitalists say every business has a purpose beyond the financial, right? And a great metaphor that one of my colleagues, Ed Freeman, professor at Darden School of Business at the University of Virginia, says, every human being has to produce red blood cells, right, to survive. Without red blood cells, you're dead. But that doesn't mean the purpose of a human being is to produce red blood cells, right? So every business has to generate profit to persist over time. But does that mean it's its purpose? No, it's a function that it has to fulfill. So that's number one. And recognizing, identifying, and embracing and really using the purpose to guide you in your business, right? Guide your decisions in the context of business is a whole other way of orienting, right? Related to this, and this is, these are artificial distinctions, they're all kind of the same thing, windows into a hologram or something. But the other one is a stakeholder orientation. So following the prevailing paradigm where the purpose of business is making money, then the focus of business is serving shareholders, right? That's who matters. In a conscious business, you recognize that a business is an ecosystem, right? You've got customers, you have employees, you have vendors, you have investors, you have the communities you do business in, you have the environment. Without any of them, without any one of them, there's no business, right? No customers or clients, no business. No one to deliver the service or to make the products, no business. No air or water, right? No human beings, right? No business, right? I mean, it's just kind of common sense. So from that understanding and a recognition of interconnectedness and interdependence, you go, okay, to create a healthy business, you need to create a healthy ecosystem, which means you need to create value for all of the stakeholders. Because if any one of them is, the whole system, finds its lowest, place. So healthy, vibrant ecosystem with healthy, vibrant stakeholders means a healthy, vibrant business. And John Mackey refers to it as the paradox of profits, is profits come not because you focus on profits, they come because you've created value for others, right? And served others. And this is the experience. And I have the good fortune of talking with and working with, a lot of incredible human beings who've built amazing businesses over the past 30-some years. And they all say the same thing. I mean, we did a salon with Fidel Baccio. I don't know if any of you have heard of Bon Appetit Management Company. Bon Appetit is a food service company. They provide the lunches at Google, Twitter, Intel, Amazon. Dominican. They're amazing company, right? Pioneers in sustainable agriculture. And Fidel, who started 25 years ago, he started with a purpose. People that are eating food in institutions need to eat good food, right? Before he came along, it was all frozen or out of a box or can. It's like, no, they need nutritious, delicious, healthy, vibrant food. And I'm going to deliver that. And everyone thought he was crazy because this is, institutional, machine thing. Anyway, he's got a practically $1 billion company. And as he said, every time I've talked to him, he said the same thing. I never thought about making money, that just comes if you do everything right. And, literally the guy's, it's a $1 billion company. And it came from pursuing that purpose relentlessly. I asked him the question, and I think I probably digress a little. I'll come back to your question. I'll ask you to ask it again. But Fidel, I asked him, I did an interview with him for my radio program, and I asked him what the role of the leader is, right? To your point about leaders. And Fidel said, well, the most important thing that a leader does is to be consistent, is to be consistent, and specifically to consistently hold up the purpose. Every day, this is our purpose, this is our purpose, this is our purpose. And the other thing he said is create an environment, a culture where people feel comfortable being themselves. And Yeah. So back to your question, or do you want, or you don't have, you can do whatever you want.
So, thank you. The second part of the question, thank you, was well, let me preface a bit, is given our times, I think people are very interested in how a CEO can actually go through a paradigm shift himself or herself. And
okay.
So it's different if somebody sort of has always been more of a socially responsible conscious capitalist versus someone who's actually gone through this paradigm shift from old business to conscious capitalism. So can you share with us one or two examples of someone you've seen go through a paradigm shift?
So yes and is my answer to that. And also I remember now where we were, I got lost in the story, which was the 4 principles of conscious capitalism, how it's different from CSR, and then the question about the CEOs. So this is a perfect segue because the 3rd principle is conscious leadership, right? So first I'm going to briefly say what I mean by that and then come to your question. So what we mean by conscious leadership is, as opposed to focusing on me, mine, right? And looking at what I'm going to make and my ego, is recognizing that the purpose of the leader is to hold up the purpose and to create value for all the stakeholders. And then 3rd is to hold the 4th principle, which is conscious culture, is to cultivate a culture that nurtures human beings to learn, grow, develop, and flourish. So to your point, consciousness is not an on-off switch, right? Though we do have our moments, like I had my moment in college when I was in the room with the guys and realized, what am I doing here, right? So you do have moments, right, where there's kind of a big shift, but consciousness is a spectrum, and was it the Buddha and many others who said, one minute you're enlightened and the next minute you're not, right? It's a question of how you're showing up in the moment. So it's a developmental process. So my experience, I'm working with people who have been on this path for decades, right? I'm not really working with people who are looking to make a transition because, quite frankly, most people who are, let's say, truly coming from the other paradigm can't see this paradigm, right? So what drives people to a paradigm shift is usually it's a crisis is the big thing, right? You have a crisis or a series of crises, and then you're caused to reflect, and you surrender, and then new life emerges. The other one is if you're really if you're curious and open and intelligent, you can push the edge of your paradigm and see over the edge. And I noticed a few years ago, and I want to talk to the CSR thing. A few years ago, IBM Consulting did a paper on the state of, it was 2008 actually, of the state of CSR. And when I read that, CSR, their definition of it was actually coming up against the edge of conscious capitalism. It was really interesting to see. Yeah, so here's the difference, and this is why this will make sense. CSR traditionally, and I did an event at Berkeley the other day at the Center for Corporate Responsibility, which has really started out of CSR. I mean, it's about CSR. And Kelly, the founder, and Joe Magnus, who's the executive. I had tea with Joe, and she said, well, I won't go there, but I'm sorry. I realized that was a little off. So CSR typically is old paradigm, meaning our business is about making money, right? And for strategic reasons, you gotta appease the activists and the media. For guilt, oh gosh, we're making so much money, we better give back, But it's like adding a guest room onto the mansion, right? The house is the same, and it's going in the same, or if it were a vehicle, it's going in the same direction, we're just putting a sidecar on it, right? Whereas conscious capitalism is a completely different orientation. And when a company that's coming from a conscious capitalist place does community service or is acting responsibly, they're not doing it strategically. They're not doing it to appease anyone. They're doing it because it's a natural expression of who they are, right? And they continue to do more and more things in service to, because the community is a stakeholder. And, oh, what are we doing? How are we serving the community stakeholder? Oh, you know, we need to be doing more because that's part of who we are and what we do. And I can tell specific stories of, well, do you mind, tell us? So, and I know some people have issues with Whole Foods Market. I have the greatest respect for both of the CEOs and for the company, and recognize, like everyone else, you know, they're not perfect, and they're perfect in their imperfection. You know, show me someone and any company that's perfect, and I'll show you something that's not on this planet, right? So, from its inception, Whole Foods has given 5% of its profits to communities, and every store, every region decides where the money goes. About, I don't know, 7-8 years ago, the executive team was, you know, sat down and they were looking at all their stakeholders, and they went, community stakeholder, great what we're doing every year, what the stores are doing, but something's missing. And they recognized that they were now a global company. And they felt that their community was now beyond the places that they were selling, you know, where they had stores. And they said, you know, the places that we source products from, there are communities too, and we need to do something there. And so they came up with a microcredit program to provide microloans to women, mostly with 98% women, in the communities where they source products, bananas, coffee, cacao, and stuff like that. All, you know, less developed communities. And they weren't providing them to the farmers that they were buying from, but to the people in the communities, because they recognized that as communities flourish, then their suppliers flourish, and, you know, again, the whole ecosystem is better. To date, they've provided $32 million of loans in 6 years or something like that. 98% payback rate, and it touched, I don't remember how many tens of millions of people, right? So a few years ago, John Mackey, a few years ago, launched, really got the company back to its health roots and started a whole health orientation. And as part of that, now in the last year and a half, they started a whole kids foundation. They've put in a couple thousand school gardens and education programs teaching kids about nutrition and food, because they're committed to ending obesity. Now, you know, yeah, maybe they're cultivating future customers or everything, but no, they're committed to, you know, we want a healthy planet. We want healthy people. And then one other I'll add, and, you know, Walter Robb, who's the co-CEO, has been passionate about the food desert, right? The inner cities where people criticize Whole Foods. It's too expensive for, you know, poor people to eat there. So in May, I think it is, they're opening their first store in inner city Detroit. It's called Whole Cities. It's the first of what will be dozens pretty quick, because they've got mayors all over the country asking for it. It's going to be, they're changing the business model so that it can be low cost, low price access to healthy food, you know, not as big stores and all that. So that's just an example of, that's what you do when you're committed to the health of your, you know, all of your stakeholders, the community being one of them. And you assess that. How are we serving the community? How are we fulfilling our purpose? And you know, how are we fulfilling our purpose vis-a-vis the community? That's what you do. It's very, very different from what you do when you're like, okay, who can we give money to that will, you know. So did that answer that? And then,
so you said that the first one is opening in May?
I think it's May, or it's sometime between May and July.
And they're calling it,
Whole Cities.
Whole Cities.
Yeah, and they're setting up they're doing it under a nonprofit, so they don't have to be profitable, because they're not looking to make money on food. They're looking to get food into places that need food. So then you asked the question. Do you want me to go to the leadership thing, or you want to go somewhere else?
That's okay.
Okay.
You've answered the four.
Oh, conscious culture is the last. So purpose, stakeholder orientation, conscious leadership, and conscious culture. And it's kind of like pairs. The purpose and the stakeholder orientation are really what it's about. And then to do it takes a conscious leadership and conscious culture. And the conscious culture piece is essentially a culture that nurtures human beings, right? That one, again, that everyone in your ecosystem, especially your team, is connected to the purpose and is committed to and actively involved in creating value for all the stakeholders, including themselves, right? And also that there's learning, growth, and development throughout the system. People.
So I'd like to shift a bit. You've done so much work And I'd like to go to your first book, Working for Good, in which you describe a system of 5 key skills. And those 5 skills are awareness, embodiment, connection, collaboration, and integration. Again, awareness, embodiment, connection, collaboration, and integration are the skills. So, Jeff, would you please explain why you call it a system? And what's the best way for people to begin practice of the system?
Yeah, so, and you could say that the conscious capitalism model, is also a system, right? A system is an interconnected array of interconnected elements that exist as a whole, right? So I see those 5 skills, and I use kind of there's an image in there, what's the word, like not a Venn diagram, but overlapping circles. They're all connected to each other. There's a name for that, mandala or something maybe, Anyway, so I see each of these skills is really connected to all of the other ones. You can enter in wherever you enter in, and wherever you are, you're connected to all the other ones. So that's a system. And I came up, I mentioned, when I was working on the book and I was going through, what the heck have I been doing for whatever, how many years it was, and what have I learned, and what do I need to learn? And this kind of, I recognized that these were, and I probably could have done a different array, but these really were 5 core skill buckets that I focused on a lot and recognized as essential. So awareness is really the mother of all skills, right? And it's the conscious and conscious capitalism. Awareness is, and it's also this kind of ties into the Being Human project that I work on, where we're really holding up that conscious awareness is an emergent human capacity that's coming online more and more. And it's coming online more and more because for our individual and collective survival and flourishing, it's essential, right? We've got the conceptual down really well, right? I mean, what we're doing in the conceptual space is mind-blowing. I mean, with all of our technology, nanotechnology, I mean, it's extraordinary what we've done in the last 50,000 years in the conceptual plane. We've lost touch with the sensory plane to a very significant extent, but we're coming back to that, right? Relating to the world through our senses, through movement, through sight, through touch. So that one's coming back online a little bit. Again, the conceptual has just totally taken over the last, 5,000-10,000 years. So, and then there's this other capacity which has popped up from individuals and communities over the past thousands of years, from Buddha and Jesus, and these guys show up who have these amazing capacities and insights. But it's not the predominant orientation. The predominant orientation has been, the map maker. And so, I posit that, and really conscious capitalism is a reflection of this, that right now, for us to survive and flourish as a species, we need something else, right? And that's the ability to observe the effects of what we're doing, right? Observe and adjust. And that's conscious awareness, right? And it happens on the micro level, in conversation, in an interaction in work and whatever. And it happens on the macro level is like, what are we doing through any single business, any single factory, right? And our economy overall, right? How is it fostering our survival and our flourishing, and how is it undermining it? And we can start to recognize that if we just focus on making money and then the rest of that stuff, these are just the machines that are making it happen, we go, wait a second, why is everybody getting sick? Why is everybody unhappy? And all these, we go, okay, wait a second. Reset that program here. Okay, so the thing, and I have a title, you saw, it was Chief Activation Officer. Now they call me the Activator because I just like when I show up, things happen. It's like troublemaker or whatever. And but to that point is, ideas are great, but ultimately, if they're not manifest, then they're just ideas. So the embodiment piece is how do we take our awareness? How do we take our ideas and start to bring them into our daily interactions, into our businesses, into our work interaction. And that's the embodied piece.
So with that in mind,
Yes.
I have a specific question, because you mentioned the term showing up.
Yeah.
And the need to show up at work, regardless of one's circumstances. So what does that mean for someone who feels trapped in their work, or feels stuck, or afraid of losing their job? How can showing up at work help them with their exact situation?
I'm going to tell you a story.
Good.
So, 2008, right? The economy was going like this, and I had a friend who worked at Expedia, right? And Expedia was one of those companies that just took the machete out, right? And every few weeks they would chop off another few hundred people. So she called me up and said, "This is horrific. Like, everybody's running around scared. We don't know if we're going to be next." And so I said, if you're feeling this way, I get, everyone else in your team probably is too. She said, "Yeah." I said, "And your boss?" He said, "I would expect so too." I said, "Well, why don't you start talking to your teammates, right? And then why don't you, or all of you, go to your boss and say, how you feel, and what do you think about it?" So she did, and she called me up. She says, "Oh my God, it's amazing. We're all talking to each other, and it feels like we're together. We're not like all individuals, scared of but we're relaxed, we're grounded, and all this." No one from her team got fired, right? And so I say, take the risk of having a conversation, right? Expressing what it is that you're sensing to someone else. It can be a colleague, coworker, your boss. Just take that risk of expressing what you're sensing, because chances are they're sensing it too, and they're relieved to have somebody else who gives them permission to talk about it. And from there, you never, and yeah, you know what? Maybe you get fired, but you maybe get fired otherwise and be miserable. You might as well be alive and get fired, than be dead and get fired.
Absolutely.
Right? That comes from fear. Right?
Here, here.
Yeah, so did that answer
Yes.
your question? You're welcome.
And final question, but we'll have questions from the audience in a minute, is what's on your horizon? What's coming for you? What's coming for you from the
Big
future?
wave, no.
Yeah. What is exciting you that's coming forward toward you in your life?
So I was having a conversation with my friend Amrit beforehand, and we're talking about kids, right? I have a 14-year-old daughter, and people have, they ask you whenever, so what was your favorite time, right, in her development, her growth? And my answer always is, well, right now, of course, right? And because now it's who she is, and it's like, wow, more. And in some respects, it's the same thing with work. And it's like, right now is like, there's so much going on. It's so rich. And there's, I've got time-based pulls or pushes, so I've got this event in April, I have this Conscious Capitalism CEO Summit in October, I have the Being Human event in September. So those things kind of pull you into the future, but the process of getting to the future is showing up here tonight, right? It's like, and you do your planning, and you're, this, and, can you design this, and can you place this, and all that, but then it's like, okay, good, it's all, so the answer is I don't know. This is an emerging process, right? It's been an emerging process for decades. One of the realizations that I've had is that it's an emerging process. Life is an emerging process. We are emerging processes. And you can tell stories about the future all you want. You can project, and there's value in doing that because it kind of directs you. But at the end of the day, you're out in the ocean. You don't know exactly what the wave's going to come. How big, how fast, which direction, So you just have to be ready to paddle and catch the wave. So that's my real answer. Yeah.
Very zen. Wonderful. So let's hear some questions from the audience.
So there's a piece of this current paradigm of corporate world that's systemic there's the fiduciary responsibility, or they're legally obligated to do what they can to give the best return to their shareholders. How do you see conscious capitalism going about those concerns?
Sure. There's a couple things. Yeah, B Corp is one. We're going to talk about that in a second.
Investors tend to be uncomfortable with this new form.
So there's a yes. First of all, recognize that most businesses are not public companies, right? So most businesses are privately owned, family owned, and they don't have those considerations and concerns in many respects, in many instances, right? The owner is the operator, right? So that's one piece to recognize. You know, we think of business and we think of Wall Street and public companies. You know, it's not where most of the jobs are. I mean, they're a big part of our economy, but they're not the whole story, is one. Secondly, B Corp, right? So, and B Lab, there I don't remember exactly, 13 states that have enacted benefit corporation laws, California being one of them. There's another 17 on the pipeline. It's going to happen. It's going to change, right? And a company like Whole Foods, they've been doing this since their inception. They did it before they were public. They do the, you know, they donate 5%. They practice business this way. You know, really, at the end of the day, I mean, companies fail for various reasons, but there are so many companies that are practicing business this way that are so friggin' successful, that are industry leaders, that, you know, what are you going to tell them? Don't do it? All investors care at the end of the day is they're making a return, right? So if in fact this way of doing business does deliver on all fronts the way we believe it does, it's also delivering on the financial front. So, and this is again, emergent process. If this might be a tween, right? Let's talk in 10, 20 years when it's a mature, young adult, you know? When you're 20 something, you know, it seems like when you're 50 something, as I am, you go, you know what? This is young and it's amazing already, you know, impactful already.
Next question.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Here at the Venture Greenhouse, I'm on the steering committee, and as we've been developing the Venture Greenhouse over the last 2 years, one of the interesting conversations that happened on the steering committee was, of course, this was begun with a lot of green values and wanting to support entrepreneurial endeavors that have a conscious capital orientation to them. And a couple of the people on the steering committee have more of a background as typical venture capitalists. And their response recently was that venture capitalists aren't supporting green businesses and have seen that really wasn't something that was